Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, whatever time of day it is for you. Welcome back to my channel. It's another Magic the Gathering video, specifically my favorite format, another value vintage deck tech. Now, I promised I wasn't going to be here at this particular time, that I wouldn't be back so soon, but folks, I can't stop thinking about this format. I'm always thinking about ideas. I love it when I get to brew things and it potentially could be good, as opposed to being in a solved format where you brew things and they're garbage. Now, this deck still could be garbage. I haven't really had the chance to play test it, but I've done a lot of gold fishing and I think it has the potential. Now, the other thing I'm going to say is this deck is not finalized. So if you have ideas, comments, card suggestions, put it down below. Keep in mind a few things, that these decks have to be less than $30 according to TCG Mid. So I mentioned that in the previous couple deck techs, but that's the very key part. So for example, I know Uro's a great card, but it's $2.17 a pop, and so you know, every one of these I add, that's another $2.17 essentially that I have to cut. And furthermore, if Uro's go up 10 cents on average on TCG Mid, that's going to impact my budget and I'm going to have to alter the deck. So having a little wiggle room is nice and helpful. Okay, so what is this deck? Well, it's inspired from me always looking at the Discord, but looking at the tournament results. So in the tournament results of the Discord, there are a number of wilderness reclamation decks. And although I love the idea of a lot of these that I'm seeing, a lot of them are 3-color. And what I think my impression of this format is, unless you have super cheap lands that are going to tap for 3 mana, like unclaimed territory for creature decks, there isn't going to be, I don't think there's a lot of room to have 3 colors, because you're going to spend so much money on mana and it's probably not going to be the most reliable. A lot of it's going to come untapped. I mean, there's a lot of different variations. So what I decided to do is do just a blue-green version. So for the uninformed, what is Wilderness Reclamation? Wilderness Reclamation is the namesake of the deck, and it is an enchantment for 3 mana and a green, so 4 total mana, that at the beginning of your end step, untap all lands I control. Now, for those who maybe aren't, or maybe newer to the game, because my channel is mostly not Magic the Gathering, lands are what you add mana, and these mana allow you to play your spells. So the more mana, the better in general. So think, if I have 4 lands in play, I can cast something for 4, and then I untap. If I can cast something at instant speed, now I have 4 more mana. Or if I'm casting everything at instant speed, my 4 mana is now 8 mana, and my 5 mana is now 10 mana, so it doubles. It basically is doubling your land, and if I have more than one Wilderness Reclamation, it might triple my mana, etc., etc. So what am I trying to do with all of this mana? Well, the first thing I would say is, on my turn, what I'm going to try to do is I want to cast a Hydroid Krasis. A Hydroid Krasis is a 0/0 for X, a green and a blue. And when I cast this, I'm going to gain X life and draw X cards where I round down the X. So, for example, if I spend 4 mana, a green and a blue, I'm going to, half of 4 is 2. I'm going to gain 2 life. I'm going to draw 2 cards. If I spend 5 mana, I would also draw 2 cards because I round down according to the card. It also flies and has trample. So this is like the big boy that I'm trying to land and stick on the battlefield. But then I'm going to get to untap. Why is that so helpful? Well, when I cast something big, I'm drawing cards, I'm gaining life, trying to stay alive. But then what am I going to do with that mana? I'm going to cast things like Counterspell. Counterspell, just if somebody tries to cast something, I can just counter it and say no. Archmage Charms, same concept. I get to counter a spell, possibly draw 2 cards, possibly steal a permanent. Things about that. And if I don't have those cards, I can cast something like a Memory Deluge, where I get to look at the top X of my cards, where X is the amount of mana spent. So for this one, it's 4 mana, and then put 2 of them in my hand. There's a variety of different things I can do. Now, some of you may be asking, wow, this sounds super powerful. Like, why isn't everybody doing this? Well, this enchantment costs 4, and a lot of things can happen by 4, by turn 4 to get this out, especially if you're on the draw, meaning you go second instead of first. Well, how can I accelerate my way out? Well, I got 3 different spells that are going to help me get this Wilderness Reclamation out. The first is Growth Spiral. Growth Spiral is a green and a blue instant. I'm going to draw a card, and then if I have another land in my hand, I can put it onto the battlefield. So imagine it's turn 2. I play my land, so I have 2 lands in play. Okay, I pass the turn because maybe I'm holding a counter spell up to stop what they're doing. And they don't do anything I want to counter, or maybe they don't do a whole lot at all. They play a tap land. I can cast Growth Spiral, and now at the end of my second turn, I now have 3 mana instead of 2 mana. And I drew a card, so I have a better odds of having that 3rd mana in my hand. Okay, their Explore does the same thing, but that's going to be at a sorcery speed, meaning I have to do it on my turn. And then lastly, there's this Planar Genesis. This is kind of a newer card that's come out since I've returned to the game. I get to look at the top 4 cards in my library. I can put a land among them onto the battlefield, so it's very similar to Growth Spiral in that sense. And if I don't, I can just pick a card and put it into my hand and put the rest at the bottom of the library. So this card's super powerful, because then now what this allows me to do is early on, it's going to ramp me into my Wilderness Reclamation. Maybe I already have my 4 mana, but I'm looking for a Wilderness Reclamation, and now this is going to help me find it. So this card is super, super powerful. So what else? What else is the deck made up of? Well, we're trying to go fast, get out Wilderness Reclamation, play a Hydrate Krasis. What are some other things we can do? Well, we have this Earl Titan of Nature's Wrath. Now, this is a card I want to play more of. So if you have ideas about this deck list, please comment down below ideas to do this. I've had a lot of people contribute, cut some counter spells, cut some Archmage Charms because they're kind of expensive, which they are. So I can play a second Earl. Right now I'm going to try it out like this, but then I'm super open to maybe some more of those things, because I think Earl could be really good. So let's see what Earl does. Okay, I'm actually going to skip that first line of text, and I'm going to read the second line, and then I'm going to come back to it, okay? So whenever Earl enters the battlefield or attacks, you gain 3 life, draw a card, and then you may put a land card from my hand onto the battlefield. So for 3 mana, it's a lot like my Growth Spiral, but I gain 3 life. Okay, so let's go back to that first line. When Earl enters the battlefield, sacrifice it unless it's escaped. So if I cast it for that 3 mana, I get to draw the card, I get to gain the life, I can put the land onto the battlefield, but I have to sacrifice it and put it into my graveyard. So what's this escape thing? This escape thing says if I play green, green, blue, blue, and exile 5 cards from my graveyard, okay, I can pay its escape cost. So that means this is my ability to put my Earl onto the battlefield and get the ability, gain 3 life, draw a card, but then I get to keep it now. And now it's a 6/6. And furthermore, it does that ability every time it attacks. So this is going to be a card that's going to be huge in keeping me alive, drawing me cards, keep the game going, because I don't have a lot of ways to interact with creatures. So how am I going to get so many cards in my graveyard? How am I going to even find this one of Earl? Well, it's pretty simple. I'm going to play 3 Tamiyo, Collector of Tales. So Tamiyo's a planeswalker for 4 mana, has really high base health, if you will, loyalty counters of 5, and I can +1 and choose a non-land card name, and then reveal the top 4 cards in my library, and I can put all the cards with the chosen name into my hand and the rest into my graveyard. So maybe I don't have Wilderness Reclamation. I could play this Tamiyo, hopefully on turn 3 because of Growth Spiral. I can start naming Wilderness Reclamation and basically look at the top 4 cards. And if I don't get it, I just put those cards in the graveyard. Well, maybe I'm looking for Wilderness Reclamation, but my Uro enters the or goes into the graveyard. Well, now I've essentially just drawn my Uro, and I've given it fuel to escape it. So I think that synergy between Tamiyo and Uro are going to be super powerful, and it's going to help me find my Uro, even though I only have one. I think in a perfect world, I would have 2 or 3, though. Then, additionally, the Uro is going to be there. What else do we have to do to win the game? Because 5 cards to win between Hydroid, Krasis, and Uro, that doesn't seem like a lot. Well, what we can do, and we have to be a little bit careful because we have some creatures that draw a lot of cards, but we could potentially get ourselves in a situation where there's not a lot of cards left in our graveyard because of Tamiyo. And because of this, what we can do is we can go ahead and play this one-of card. It's actually $9.67, by the way. So I'm using about a third of my budget for this card, and it's a Nexus of Fate. Nexus of Fate says take an extra turn after this one for 7 mana, and if Nexus of Fate would be put into a graveyard from anywhere, I can just reveal it and shuffle it back into my library. So if I mill it over with Tamiyo, it goes back to my graveyard. I shuffle it. If I cast it and take an extra turn, I can put it into my graveyard, or I can put it into my library and shuffle it. So I've now created this loop where maybe I only have 1 card left in my library, and it will always be Nexus of Fate. So I have this inevitability where I might just honestly take an infinite amount of turns. Now, what are we going to do with that? Because maybe Uro's on the battlefield. I can't draw a card if there's no library. Hopefully I have a Hydroid Krasis at this point, because we're really talking really end game. But we do have this land, and it's called Restless Vinestock. I've just stumbled across this. It's an exciting card to me. I can pay 5 and turn it into a 5/5 creature with trample and attack somebody with it. So I potentially could run into a loop where I am casting 5 mana every turn to make this a 5/5 attacking, and then casting my Nexus of Fate. Well, how does that work? That seems like so much mana. Keep in mind, if we're at that point in the game, we're really hoping we have a Wilderness Reclamation. So back to, what if they destroy my Wilderness Reclamation? What if I'm milling over cards that I want? Well, Tamiyo does have this second ability where it says return target card from a graveyard to my hand. So even though Tamiyo is putting cards into my graveyard, she also allows me to take them out. Now, I don't know how practical this line of text is, but she has this passive ability that says spells and abilities your opponents control can't cause me to discard cards or sacrifice permanents. So we have a lot of kind of synergy going on. All right, so some other cards that I think are going to be high impact, and then I'll kind of move on to the sideboard, and we'll call the deck tech a complete done, is Castle Vantress. So it's basically an island, because, I mean, it's not, but it's going to enter untapped unless I control an island, and I control a ton of islands. Here's 10, and here's 4 more, so 14 of my lands are islands, and it comes untapped. But it has this ability, pay 2 and 2 blue, so 4 total mana, tap it, and then I scry 2. And again, this could be super beneficial because maybe I have my Wilderness Reclamation, I cast a Hydroid Krasis, and I have a bunch of counter spells, and they don't do anything worth me countering. Well, now I can use my Castle Vantress to scry to look at the top 2 cards, figure out what I do and do not want. So how do I interact with creatures or decks that are aggro? Well, I'm hoping between Hydroid Krasis and Uro, they're going to gain me enough life to keep me alive. But I do have some cards. I'm little suspicious on these, but I do have cards like Evacuation, which is going to return all creatures to their owner's hands. Unfortunately, that does return mine, but if I time it right, it's not going to return my Restless Vinestock. And also, Hydroid Krasis is going to be a card that I gain life and draw cards that might have some abilities for that. And then in the sideboard, we have some cards for that also. I have another 2 Evacuations, and then I also have Haze of Pollen. So this is a card that is strictly meant to just buy me time, prevent all combat damage that would be dealt to me this turn. So they might attack with 1,000,000 damage, but I'm going to take 0 if I cast Haze of Pollen. Some other cards is, right now I have some Spell Pierce. I feel like some cheap interaction, cheap counter magic for combo decks, or maybe a control matchup. These are the type of cards that I believe are going to be help me win those sort of fights. over maybe an Uro or a Hydroid Krasis. Then Leyline of the Void. You've seen this in like every one of my decks, I think, or something similar. I just think being able to interact with the graveyard in a permanent way, so not like Tormod's Crypt or anything like that, but specifically things like Leyline of the Void are really critical to being successful in this deck. I do have Wilt. Wilt just is generally good, useful, destroy target artifact and enchantment, but then it cycles also. So if I don't have a good use for it and I need to draw into something else, I can pay to discard it and draw a new card. So that is kind of the sideboard. That's kind of the whole thing. So I think the deck has the potential to have a ton of power. It's just a matter of whether I can get on the battlefield with a Wilderness Reclamation fast enough to the point where the opponent hasn't overwhelmed me with creatures. Well, that is going to be basically the whole deck tech. Again, I've mentioned this before. Please tell me down below, like, what are your thoughts? Like, what am I missing? Obviously, no deck is perfect. This is just a brew at this point, and I think when I'm able to, I'm going to try to get some more playtesting in, like I did with the green-black Delirium. I want to see how this deck plays so you guys can see how it plays also. And we can find the holes in here and try to put the pieces together. For example, if I wanted to play more Uros, it's possible. My Nexus of Fate, I could just cut that and have $10 open, and maybe we can play more Uros because maybe that's more impactful than the one of Nexus of Fate. But this card famously goes with Wilderness Reclamation, so I want to try it out first before we, you know, put that to bed, if you will. Otherwise, folks, that's the whole video. Again, don't forget to comment down below, like the video. Otherwise, don't forget to like and subscribe on your way out, and I will see you on the other side.